All right. So we're going to go through the EOC test administration training for you guys. Mr. Sproul sent out an email the other day that had the list, or the entire training packet that you guys had. It's all there in detail for you, and actually it's there for you to read as we go through. So the very first thing we have to do is put a disclaimer on it saying that your training does not actually substitute you reading the STAR EOC test manual. And in that test manual, there's the scripts you've got to follow and all that kind of stuff. And we'll go through the various things that you can say and can't say as we go through all that. Alrighty? It's like a 100-page manual or something. It's all kinds of fun to read. So. Alright, so going through some of this, we break the training down into a couple different areas. The first one is going to be test security. That's going to be the actual handling of the materials. So if you're actually giving a test, that's the situation where you have to go pick up the materials from the testing coordinator, and Mr. Sproul is the testing coordinator, so everything will be with him, and you'll pick it up. That way you are in charge of the materials the whole time until you actually return them back to the testing coordinator. We were talking about a situation this morning where, you know, a irregularity, like if you were to pick up your test materials and you walk in, set them on the desk, and then go run and get a cup of coffee or go to the bathroom or something, that's a no-no. So make sure you always have your test materials in your hand, and it's not just left somewhere, because, you know, last thing you want is a student walking in and say, hey, oh, check that out, and, you know, next thing you know, we've got problems all over the place. We'll talk about what's going on with test security during the actual testing time, how we make sure answer documents are secure, any kind of scratch paper, what makes a legal test document, and all that kind of stuff here in a minute. And then after you get done with it at the end of the day, or right before lunch, we'll talk about what we do there. But then later on, the second part of it, we'll get to the confidentiality part of it, maintaining the confidentiality of the students, making sure answer documents are filled out properly, like I said, what you can say, what you can't say, all of those things. All right? Good to go there? I'll try to go fast. All right, so let's talk about test security real quick. We can read through these really, really quickly. All right, so you guys are here to take the training, and at the end of the training, we'll have you guys sign the oath. There's a whole issues of boxes that you have to read and initial, and then sign at the end. And that's just saying that you're going to make sure that you follow the proper way to administer the test in accordance to the rules and regulations set forth by the TEA. Right here, it says no person may view, reveal, or discuss the contents of a test or answer document unless specifically instructed to do so, and that would be more along the lines of some of the special accommodations for testing with special ed kids, IEP kids, 504 kids, so on and so forth. That also plays into the oral administration. So unless you're actually specifically giving oral administration of the test, you can't walk around and discuss the test with other people. This is one of those where you want to get amnesia as soon as the test is over, completely forget about it. You don't have to worry about it. We'll get to marking and calculations and all that stuff here in just a second. So this is the deal with secure materials. Obviously, you can't take a test, go make copies of it so that you can pass it out and use it as a teaching material later on. I think that's fairly obvious, and we know what's going on there. You guys have seen this before, where the test booklets are sealed. They have to break the seal with their pencil when they start the test. Every once in a while, you'll see where maybe the adhesive didn't stick right, or where it accidentally tore in shipping or something like that. If that's the case, it's not something that we have to like freak out about or anything like that. As long as it's taken care of before we give it to the students, you can just take a piece of Scotch tape and tape the seal back, and then they can go back and break it when the test starts. So it's really not that big of a deal. A lot of that stuff will probably be caught beforehand anyway. So this is what we were talking about just a second ago. No person may answer verbally or non-verbally to any questions that relates to the test before, during, or after. So that's one of those situations where the kid can't raise their hand and say, hey, what's going on with this question? I mean, I think there's a part of the script that says really you can just say, follow the directions. All right, we're not going to give baseball signals or hand signals or anything like that. That's going to signify that number one is A or anything like that. So just make sure, again, we're not passing out answers or helping kids specifically on answering a question. So down here, no person may review or discuss student responses during or after the test. This gets into the whole active monitoring thing. You're supposed to just actively monitor, make sure that they're actually taking the test and not actually reading the questions, or coughing if you see that they're writing something down, or answer to number one is A or something like that. So we just have to make sure we're just paying attention, doing the active monitoring, but actually not helping them on the test. So that goes back to that. You can't change, you can't instruct a student on how to answer a question. You can't go back and change an answer later because you know they got it wrong. All right, that's one of those situations where we're dealing with the integrity of the test. We can talk about what can happen to you with that here in a minute. As far as any kind of weird marks on the test document or answer document of the test booklet, you can't do anything about it. Really, the test booklet is there so they can make notes, they can highlight. Basically, the test booklet is theirs. But the answer document, you can't go back and manipulate that either. So when we talk about things, materials being securely locked up when they're not in use, part of that is picking them up at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, handing them back in at the end of the day. If there was a situation where we have to leave the classroom, say fire, emergency, something crazy kind of happens, do you know what we do in that situation? Like say that all of a sudden there was a fire and we all had to evacuate the building. Do you guys know the actual protocol for what you're supposed to do if the test is actually going on right then? Yeah, exactly. You put the answer document, any kind of scratch record they have, just put it in the booklet, leave it on the desk, get out, shut the door. If the door locks, great. At best, shut the door and then get out the building. We can still maintain test security with the door shut, and then we'll have to make some notes and have to let everybody know what's going on, but still the integrity of the test wasn't interrupted as long as everything's right there together. That also brings about what is a secure material. Okay, that's the test document, the test booklet, and then any other scratch paper that they use. Whatever scratch paper they use, they don't get to throw it away, they don't get to put it in the recycling bin. It has to go in the test booklet, and it becomes an official document. We've already talked about that. So you guys have probably had the definition of active monitoring hammered into your head, right? I'm going to go over the different things here in just a second, which is this right here. What is the active monitoring? It's making sure that we're watching the students, but we're not actually saying, hey, do this, do that. It's just making sure that they're actually following the test directions. So that means you're staying off your phone, you're not checking your email, all that kind of stuff we'll get to in a second. So some of the things you need to do, make sure they're on the correct section of the test, make sure they're marking the answer document, obviously they're not cheating. Cell phones, all that stuff will be put away. You shouldn't have to worry about that, although we'll talk about it just in case something like that does happen, and then they're not talking to each other. So things that you can and can't do while you're active monitoring: stay off your phone, stay off your computer, no working on grading papers, lesson plans, reading a book, anything like that. If you have to leave the classroom, there should be somebody right there to bail you out. We should have people to relieve as the test is going on. Then they become the teacher, and then you can switch places, and so on and so forth. As far as checking student responses while testing, that's one of those where you don't want to be necessarily looking specifically at the test document and the answers, the booklets and everything. That's not active monitoring, that's actually diving into the test. You guys will obviously have a seating chart. Those should be posted, you said? And they should be printed out because they're all going to Yeah, and that's one of those that you can also mark the time that the test starts, when the student leaves to go to the bathroom, so on and so forth. And then as far as regrouping during the test, it shouldn't happen with the flipping of the schedule that we have, because you get that 5 hours for the English test this time around. If we go first through sixth period, that 5-hour window shouldn't have to mess with it. But with that being said, if we do have to go somewhere else, they'll have to secure their materials, we'll have to write down what time the test is stopping and move them and then start the test again. That way that doesn't count against their 5-hour window. Now if they get up and go to the bathroom, or if they take a break to have their snacks, or if they fall asleep or something, that does count against their 5-hour window, and they actually have to be done at the end of that time. So, if somebody falls asleep or something, you can walk up to them and say, hey, wake up. You can't say, hey, hurry up, we're almost done, you're going to run out of time. That's actually something you can't do. So anything that kind of is not normal, that is not going on with the test procedures, actually has to be reported. It has to be reported to the test coordinator. That would be Mr. Sproul. And then that has to be, again, reported to the state. And there's some small irregularities. There's some big irregularities. And we'll talk about those here in just a second. Just understand that with any kind kind of irregularity, being the teacher in the building or in the testing room makes you the responsible party for any irregularity that has to be reported. Now, if it's something minor, Mr. Sproul said that we can just email them and we can go from there as far as getting things settled out. So down here, we talk about testing irregularities as anything that requires any kind of corrective action. All right, so some of the common irregularities that we have. This is the big one, that the student has the wrong answer document. Obviously, we have kids that have same last names, same first names. Everything's coded automatically. The kids don't have to code anything. The test coordinators, teachers don't have to code anything. It's just, we need to make sure that their names line up, their birthdays line up. That way, if there's two, Daniel Martinez's or whatever, we make sure that they have the right answer document. If that's, Mr. Sproul was talking about a case where they actually answered the wrong, or they had the wrong answer documents, but they found that out after they finished the test. That's one of those you have to report it as an irregularity, and then the testing coordinator has to go back and remark the right answer, or mark their answers on the correct answer documents, make documentation of it, and move forward. So it's a whole big deal. We got to make sure that accommodations get met. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. And then making sure that the kids who need to test, and the kids who don't need to test, don't test. All right. And typically those are all handled in-house. They get reported to Mr. Sproul, they get passed down the line. Typically not that big of a deal. Some of the bigger deals can actually lead to criminal prosecution, which is actually has happened before. That would be something like tampering with the test, trying to steal the test or hack the system and pull the test so that you have it before they take it, altering the test after they turn it in. I'm talking like big time major problems here. They can revoke certificates and they can actually press charges if they need to. You can't go back and actually score the test before they get sent off. And actually there's a series, or there's actually I think 3 bubbles on the front of the answer document that says S, A, and O. After they take the test. S means that you're going to score it. It was a normal test, everything's good to go. A was absent, meaning they weren't here to take their test. And finally, there's the O. Anybody know what the O is for? Okay, so that's for any kind of other situation that might arise. Like maybe, for example, somebody got sick in the middle of the test and they left. So you mark that as an O. That way, it doesn't get scored against our accountability ratings, anything like that. That could also be a situation where somebody shows up and they just don't want to take the test that day. They go in and mark C, on the whole answer document. It takes 5 minutes for them to take the test and they refuse to actually go back and take the test. Obviously, they're going to have to retake it later on anyway, so we mark that as an O. That way it doesn't count against us. Also, if they don't, with this being the English test, if they don't do the essay or something like that happens, then we have an issue and we can mark an O. It could be a situation, and we talked about this before, where maybe the kid comes back to you after the test is done and says, oh crap, I forgot to do the essay, what do I do? Well, there's a whole lot we can do. We can mark it as an O. If it's a situation where you're actively monitoring and you see that they only did half the test, as long as they haven't started reading a book or they haven't started doing something other than the test, if they're just like zoned out and haven't started anything, you can actually give the test back to them and let them finish, because that's part of the active monitoring, is making sure that the answer document is complete. Okay. So hopefully we don't.
So if it's within those 5 hours, we can give it back.
If it's within that 5 hours, and as long as they haven't pulled out a library book or anything like that, because technically if they grab some other material and start reading, that's a supplement and they've gone past the point of no return basically, and so that test is what it is. So that would be where we would mark it as an O, and it gets moved down the line. Okay. He was talking about various drawings that get placed on the pages that should have been for your essay. Obviously, we don't want to have those count against us, so we mark them as O and move on. All that kind of stuff. We were talking about securing test materials, so on and so forth. All right, so testing procedures. It says we can go to 1 teacher to 30 students. We're going to keep it about 1 to 20. We don't typically have to worry about that. So we'll have designated rooms for everybody to be in. Everybody will have a do not disturb sign out on the front. When everybody gets done with the test, you can pull the do not disturb sign off. That'll let somebody know that the testing is done. That being said, we're not just gonna release them, so we'll just hold them in the classroom until we release everybody, try to keep them quiet, you know, reading a book, something along those lines, because you could have somebody testing next to work. So that takes care of that. So I think they're gonna set it up, like we're not gonna be doing English testing in the English room, so that way we don't have to worry about covering up materials. I don't necessarily, if they're testing in your room, you would necessarily have to cover anything up, but technically speaking, if there is anything, you're supposed to either take it down, cover it up, for when they do take the test in your room. As far as taking breaks in the testing room, I think by passing out the snacks beforehand, they can kind of be in control of their own breaks. That way we don't have to say, okay, everybody stop what you're doing. It's time for a break. That way you don't mess up the kids' flow and all that kind of stuff. So we just kind of let them handle it on their own, knowing that they have 5 hours to take the test. And other than getting moved out or going to the nurse or some extreme circumstance, that time just continually moves forward. So this, on the front of the answer document, everything should be filled out for them already. You know, they used to have the labels, but they don't have the labels anymore. Everything's bubbled in form, so they shouldn't mark anything on the front of it. And it's one of those that we don't want them messing up any of the demographic fields, because all that stuff is given by the state, or it's done by the state. So if there's any markings on the front, that's part of the active monitoring thing. You check out their answer document, and then if we need to erase out anything or anything, we can go forward and do that. Okay?
Do we need to write down when they take their break, or?
So
let them-
if they leave the room, you're supposed to mark that they
Right.
leave the room, and then when they come back, you mark that they came back.
But when they take out their snack, we don't have to write that down when they're taking their own personal break?
No.
No, it's like, because they should just be in their seat, just kind of doing their own thing. A lot of times they'll just tuck their answer sheet and stuff inside of the book. They'll just, and they can sometimes put it, they should leave it on their desk.
There is no official break. If they go to the restroom, or they're not done, but they're just resting for a second, or they're just eating their snack, the clock's ticking.
Uh-huh.
But the clock only stops if you send them to the nurse, you're relocating them to another classroom because of consolidation, or if we have to evacuate. I think those are or if you take them to lunch, is that really the issue? That's the only times the clock stops on them.
Okay.
But if it's their choice, other than the nurse, it's their choice to go to the restroom 1,000 times, fall asleep, stop and take a break, the clock still ticks.
So the one that everybody always talks about is the phones and the electronics and all that kind of stuff. Basically, the rule of thumb is if it connects to Wi-Fi, it doesn't need to be near them. I think the plan is to have Ziploc bags in the rooms with sticky notes, and they can turn off their phones, they can turn off their Apple Watches or any other kind of smart device, put that in the bag, put their name on the sticky note inside of the bag, and then we can put it away. That way it's not a situation where they're even tempted by it. And we were talking about, same thing, we'll try to do everything. Watches, AirPods, phones, all that stuff. We'll just keep it all together, turn it off, and then we'll have it for them. After everybody gets done, we release them, they can have it then, and then they can take it. But from the time that they enter till the time that they leave, we'll have their electronics, and that way they're not tempted by it. Now, with that being said, if somebody forgets to turn their phone off and it rings during the test or whatever, not the end of the world. It's not something that everybody has their test voided or anything like that. We mark it as an irregularity, send an email to Mr. Sproul, he makes note of it, and then we just continue on forward. So it's not like it's a huge deal, because really technically it's not even on your person. Now, if a person has a cell phone that they didn't turn in, that's a whole other thing, and we get a hold of the testing coordinator for that reason too. Okay, so for this particular test, the English part of the test, you can have one dictionary for every 5 students, but every room that's testing should have a cart like this. Everybody should have their own calculator, or not calculator, everybody should have their own dictionary at the SARS that they can use on their own. As far as later in the year when we're doing math tests, we're doing science tests, we're supposed to have graphing calculators for the Algebra 1 test. Every kid ought to have a graphing calculator, no problem. Same thing for the biology test. the biology test, you can have one calculator for every 5 students, but again, everybody should already have one for themselves. We just have to make sure and go in and clear it. Typically, the math and the science teachers know how to clear the calculator, so it shouldn't be anything to worry about. They'll clear it, look on it, and they'll put it on the corner of their desk, look at it, and we'll just move on. It's no big deal. So as far as the test booklets go, they can mark inside of it, they can make notes inside of it, they can highlight it, they can pretty much do what they need to as far as whatever testing strategies they learned before the test to help them out. And as far as the test answer document goes, it is strictly just for the answers, okay? So no highlighters or anything like that. For the math test, science test, they can't bring their own rulers. If there's any kind of measuring that can be done, they provide a ruler in the testing booklet, and they're supposed to use that. So while you're not supposed to give specific instructions as to what to do and what not to do during the test, that's all supposed to be handled before as far as testing strategies go. Like here it says, they're not allowed to require students to first mark their answers in the test booklet. So you've got a lot of kids that'll go through, answer the questions in the book, and then they'll go back and put it on the answer document. That's a testing strategy that a lot of people use. If the kid decides not to do that, you can't tell them, hey, stop that. Just, you gotta let them roll and do what they do. We talked about this, you can't go back and say, hey, why don't you just go look at number 4? You know, let's go look at, you might check this out again. Again, basically all you can say is, please follow the directions and complete the test. So as far as test strategies go, the day of the test, you can't walk in and say, okay, we're going to do this on your test. The same thing with, like, you're going to go in, you're going to mark your answers in the book, and then you're going to mark them in the answer document. You can't tell them to do that. That takes the cheating strategy out of it. Lunch breaks, again, we're not going to have to worry about because of the way that we set up the testing window. That would involve taking up the test materials, securing the test materials, transporting them as a group, eating lunch as a group, and then transporting them back. It's a whole big logistical issue. Now, if it's a situation where we actually have to do something like that, if a kid shows up late, what we'll do is we'll have them mark the time that we stop their testing on the test booklet. That way it doesn't count against the 5-hour window that they have. So, going through some of the stuff, you're not allowed to answer any questions related to the test. So, if I was giving the science test, I can't go and answer questions about the test. I can just really reiterate the directions. A lot of the stuff we've already talked about. Active monitoring. Don't leave the room unless somebody is coming in to relieve you guys, because the last thing we want is for there to be nobody in the room. Then we got big problems. When they get done with the test, you need to make sure that you look at the answer document, just make sure it's filled out, and then go from there. Whether, you know, if they skipped one question, correct me if I'm wrong, you can say, hey, you skipped number 24.
There's a phrase in your booklet that you have to tell them. You can't tell them which question they didn't answer or what section they didn't fill out. You can only say something like, and your test isn't complete or you're not finished. And they have to try to see where it is. And if they say I'm finished, then, you know, we're gonna have to score it, or going back to the O, I'm the only one that can mark something O. And if you feel like the kid didn't attempt it at all, or, you know, wasn't taking the test seriously, we have to have a conversation about whether we scored or not. If they write one sentence in that box and they're fine with that, it's scored. But, you know, it's a fine line between, you know, what gets marked as scored and what gets marked as though if they didn't complete the test. But you are required to give back their answer document if it's blank. If they said they're finished, they're finished. And then that's that.
And then once everybody's finished, as the test monitor, you'll have the materials, they are officially secure, and then you take them to the testing coordinator to make sure they're dropped off. Really, the only time the kids should be in contact with the testing materials is when they're actually taking the test. Before and after, you as the test monitor have them in your possession. We talked about scratch group of paper a second ago. They can use it, it can be distributed as needed, but once they do use any kind of scratch paper, it becomes an official test document and it has to be turned in with the rest of the testing materials. When they get done, as long as there shouldn't be no talking, moving around, anything like that. If they do get up to go to the bathroom or whatever it is, they have to take the answer document, take any scratch paper, put it in their test booklet, close it, and then leave. So it has to be completely secured and closed before they walk out of the room. You can't tell a kid they gotta work faster, they need to slow down. They have to work, you have to let them work at their own pace. So, like I said, if a kid falls asleep, you can let them rest. You can gently nudge them saying, hey, you have 5 hours to complete the test, but that's basically all that you can tell them. So,
Are we still gonna keep time on the board?
yeah, you can still keep time. And then we talked about this too, they can't really be in possession of anything other than the test while they're taking the test. Once they turn in the test, they're welcome to read a library book or something, but that's really the only thing that they can have, and they can't actually have it until after they turn in their test. And then, he mentioned this before, you get 5 hours for the English test, you get 4 hours for the math, the history, and the science test, and the whole emergency situation thing that's on a case-by-case basis. So, tying it up real quick, there's a situation, or there is a deal where you have to write, sorry, not you, but the student has to write their name on the top of the test booklet. That way they can coordinate the test booklet with the answer document. They make a big deal of it, but you cannot write their name for them. They have to write their name. And if they go by Tiny Tim or something like that, they still need to write down, Timothy, whatever. Make sure they're using their name, that way they can match it up if they need to. Also, I think on the answer document, there is a place to code in their test booklet number, so that way they can match everything up if they need to. So there's the instructions specifically as to what you're supposed to say when they put their name on the answer document, or on the test booklet, and that's one of those that it's in the script that you have to follow if you're giving a test. It says here, but they don't do a label anymore, so we don't really have to worry about it. So like I said, just make sure that they write and it specifically said in the instructions, they're just gonna write their name on the test booklet. As far as accommodations go, any accommodation that a student gets in the classroom, they have the right to on the test, whether, whatever it says in their IEP, their 504 documents, their LPAC documents, anything like that, they get the opportunity to have that same kind of accommodation on their test. If they're an online tester, they don't necessarily get an answer booklet or a test booklet or an answer document. What they will do is have an official sheet that has the code that they have to enter in when they start their test. So there is still an official document that has to be distributed out with those online testers as well. Then we talked about oral administration and all that stuff. They can have the test read to them, but the person reading the test can't discuss it after the test is over with. Okay? That was fast and furious, and I probably left a bunch of stuff out, but any kind of questions that you guys have?
Just want to stress a few things. I already talked about the O's, but if they use scratch paper to write an essay on or do math computations, if it's a May test, you have to collect that and turn it back in with the testing materials. Don't put that in the recycling bin. That has test information on it. It's considered secure. You hit that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we got it.
And then make sure that when you hand out the answer documents, that Jonathan Delgado has Jonathan Delgado's and Evelyn Tarango has Evelyn Tarango, and not vice versa. And then obviously check for completion. We already talked about that. But we talked about the cell phone and watches and even AirPods, anything electronic. We have to take up, make sure they're off. Make sure everything, all electronic, verify with the kid that everything's off. Make them show you.
Mm-hmm.
If all this stuff is in a bag in your possession and a phone goes off, who really is at fault on that? The test administrator, right? Not the kid. So if you come to me trying to blame the kid for that, I'm gonna have a conversation with the teacher, that we talked about that. But and then going back to, the rotations in the C hallway for the non-testers, I think what I'm gonna be doing is, so like Spanish, since we have both of you in here, if one of you is testing, I'm not gonna have the other one test on a day, because I'm gonna assign sophomores and juniors and seniors to classrooms, groups of 25, and I would want one of you will have some schedule that I'll give you to where you go to C1 first period, and you're the Spanish teacher, and they work on Spanish. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then, I'll have a classroom schedule, in each classroom of what the kids, the order they're gonna work on. I know earlier I said they'd follow their schedule, but that's too complicated. I think they're gonna have a schedule on what they're gonna do each hour. And I'll try to put a certified teacher, like Spanish teacher, and that will be 6 classes, right? Now, one of them will be an elective, so that'll be your conference period, if that makes sense. So y'all may wanna get together on what you wanna give the kids, because one of you will be in that classroom when those kids work on that Spanish assignment for sophomores and juniors. And some of them, the juniors, may not have Spanish for whatever reason. Maybe they moved in with Spanish as a freshman, like my daughter had. They'll just work on an elective. Does that help you all plan things? So,
Yeah, I think once we have a schedule, we would plan accordingly.
I'll probably, since you don't have your certification yet, I'm not gonna have you test and star. I'll probably have you be the Spanish teacher, and then Evelyn, did you help with TSI last time? That's probably what we'll be doing too, but, you will probably go into those classes, on Tuesday. And the tricky thing is you may not be able to hit all the juniors. So that might be one where they just purely are doing it on their own. But is it more important to go to the sophomore classes to help them or the junior classes? Because every sophomore has Spanish, right?
He's got most of his sophomores.
And you have them anyway, right? So you have most of the juniors?
I have most of the juniors.
Yeah. Now, if you're not needed for TSI testing, then I'll have you go to the junior classes. But trying to have somebody like the English 2 teachers will go in and be the English teacher. Ms. Lamelli, who's geometry, will be the math teacher, on that Tuesday, and we'll have a rotation where the kids stay in the room and the teachers move. And then they'll have, hopefully you upload the assignment in your Chromebook or Google Classroom, Now, y'all are a different situation because they'll probably be all your kids, but English may not be all, and biology may not, so having a science teacher, math teacher rotate through while they're working on that assignment, at least the teacher's there to help them and keeps them on track. So that's probably the way we'll roll with that, if that makes sense. Any questions or anything? All right, we got 2 O's here.
Yep, I got them. We gotta make y'all officially official. So, this is your official star testing oath. It's fun stuff. You're gonna initial the front page, and I think there's 5 or 6 boxes on the top of the back page that you're gonna initial as well. Y'all flip it over real quick. Does he need to fill out the non-certified, Mr. Sproul? Does he need to be the?
Yes,
Okay.
he's not certified.
So for you, you'll also have to initial this box and put your name. Then down at the bottom, there's 3 boxes, one for your signature, one for your first name, and one for your last name. And once you have all that done, you'll be good to go. You can, actually. There you go.